All right, what is going on, everybody? Thank you for being here. Today we have a pretty special episode. So I've had this idea flowing for a while now, but I want to call it Breeder Feature. I was just talking to Jake about this. I think it'd be really cool to highlight and to focus on different breeders that are working in the hobby right now, and just feature them. So that's why I want to call it Breeder Feature. So before we bring Jake on, as I'm doing my introduction here and as I'm talking about our sponsor, Rainbow Mealworms, shout out to them, let me know if there's any sound issues or anything. Derek, Joshua, Rivera, I see all you guys in the chat. Pretty cool. I am glad to have you guys here. How's the sound? Let me know. And then also when we bring Jake on, let me know if there's any interruptions for sound and whatnot. So, all right, well, I will see you later, Derek. So again, we have been partnering with Rainbow Mealworms. Now, if you guys don't know who Rainbow Mealworms is, I'm not even like really getting paid for saying this. You know, they do a little bit of helping me out, sending me some complimentary mealworms and stuff for putting their ads in some of my videos. But even if they weren't doing anything for me, I would still represent these guys because I love their company. And if you're a leopard gecko breeder or somebody who needs dubia roaches or silkworms or crickets, they really stand by their honor code of, if it doesn't arrive alive, they will refund your money. Almost no questions asked. They just ask for like a simple little photo, showing that the insects actually arrived, dead. But they are great. So Brooke, what is going on? Brooke is our volunteer. Many of you guys know her. Brooke, be the sound check for me if you can. How am I sounding right now compared to everything? So please let me know in the comments there. I'm sure there's a little bit of a delay. So I don't know. I'm kind of testing this thing out. I got like a new intro scene. I had some music playing in the countdown timer. Let me know if that all went smooth. I'm going to watch it back and see if it didn't. But my audio is a bit scratchy. I'd move the mic or talk a little bit quieter. Okay. That's good input right there. So I'm actually going to lower the input here. So Brooke, let me know. We're going to bring Jake on right now and let me know how me and Jake's audio is going. So, all right, what's going on, Jake? Glad to have you here. There is a little bit of delay, so you might not see yourself on the screen just yet, but I have your brand and your logo above your head and your name, and let me know if that shows up clearly for you. But how you doing? I see you got a gecko there on your shoulder.
Yeah, I had to pull one out. It would only be right to have one out hanging out on my shoulder here. But I'm glad to be here. It's nice meeting you, Frank, and I really appreciate you, bringing me on here and giving me a chance to talk about some of these gargoyles.
Yeah, so your passion is really gargoyles, right? Above anything else?
100%. I mean, that's probably 95% of the collection is gargoyle geckos.
Okay, so let's take this back a little bit. I always like to know where it all started. I'll give you an example. For me, I was addicted to dinosaurs as a 5-year-old kid, and that was like a natural progression into reptiles. What's a little bit about your background history and also your family's take on your love for reptiles? You can speak on both.
Well, definitely from the beginning, I've been an outdoors person, and that just comes from, being raised that way, getting to know, hunting, fishing, going outside, especially my dad, teaching me to have a lot of respect for nature and animals and that type of stuff. So it all started from there. I've been around animals, always been out picking them up, taking little plastic cups down to a creek, trying to catch little minnows, crayfish, snakes, anything, always from day one. So it's been something that just kind of, I've been raised up on, having reptiles, having pets, animals, just in general.
So did you say you used to catch reptiles or amphibians or all of it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Because where I grew up, there's a little patch of woods and a little creek that I can go down to, or in the woods, go hunt for like a little piece of maybe like sheet metal or plywood just laying on the ground, and always enjoyed picking it up or flipping over rocks just because you never would know exactly what you would find underneath it. So that was definitely something that I really loved just from day one, being able to go out and, you know, not just reptiles in general, but just any type of animals, always been around them. So that's where it initially started, you know, my interest. And from there, honestly, you know, as you get older, you're able to take on more responsibility and that type of stuff. So from there, it just kept growing when I started, you know, being able to actually have pets and that type of stuff.
So how
Growing
old
up.
are you, Jake? If I can
So
ask.
yeah, I'm 24.
Okay, so you're like you're at a perfect age. Are you living on your own now or
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
I'm on
really
my own.
cool. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm actually from the East Coast too, New Jersey.
Okay.
So we do have that kind of connection in line. But in New Jersey, I always wanted to catch reptiles like at the creek and under rocks and stuff, like you said. But I always found more salamanders. So like my earliest childhood days were, I forget what they're called, like fire salamanders or something. They're like these little red salamanders. But yeah, so that was kind of like my earliest days before I got my first lizard, which was a leopard gecko. But if I can ask you, what does your heart gravitate towards more? Is it like slithery things or reptiles or amphibians with legs, like lizards and
Well,
stuff?
I gotta say, my number one day one has always been snakes. Like,
Wow.
even
Okay.
though, so right now I have one snake that's probably about 16 years old. It was my first pet reptile. It's just a corn snake. So I always have to give credit to snakes just because they've always been like day one, my number one interest, what I thought was the coolest about all reptiles. But definitely currently right now, which I'm sure we'll get into, like the reason I like the gargoyles so much, definitely currently right now is the geckos.
Okay. So why do you like gargoyles so much? Where did that love come from? So you went from like, ooh, I love snakes to I'm diving headfirst into gargoyles. How did that happen?
Well, I I don't remember like the exact day where I probably saw the first one as like, oh, that's, pretty sweet. But the main attraction that I have to them, which one is just chilling on my back there, is the colors. Just because the colors that they can have is, in my opinion, unlike so many other things that you can find out in nature. When they're selectively bred for all that red and orange and how intense that is. Me personally, I just haven't been able to find, like many other animals with that type of color. So that was definitely probably like my number one thing that attracted me to them, was the fact that it's an animal and it looks like you painted on them, you know? So
Yeah, their
that was
colors.
definitely, yeah, my number one thing, on why I enjoy them so much. And then just their personality as well. Um, I guess also it comes down to their care. It's very simple, but for their personality, like this one, I could be walking around the house right now doing things. It will always hang out like pretty much in the same spot on my back or on my shoulder. They're pretty cool. They're easy to handle. They aren't aggressive or anything like that. So that's definitely another big reason why I really like them as well.
Now, with your gargoyles, do you find that a lot of them are jumpy and only a few of them are more chill, or do they all kind of chill out as time goes on?
Most of them are chill for me. I have had some pretty crazy ones, but I think it does get better as you learn how to handle them, what they like when they like being picked up, or, there's definitely a better way than others when you're handling them to make sure they feel, nice and calm. But I would say most of them are pretty chill just because I do make sure they, at the end of the day, they are pets to me. So, all of them do get a decent amount of my time. And once they start getting used to that, they usually are pretty chill and will calm down a bit.
So one of the people just commented that the one in the middle here is so saturated, and that really caught my eye too. No filter needed for red gargoyle geckos, right? I mean, their saturation is like you said, almost uncomparable in the reptile kingdom. So what is this right here? What do we got here?
So which one are you referring to, like the top one or the bottom one?
Let's do both, and let's do your
Okay.
take on what makes it more red versus what makes it more fire orange, or you know what I mean?
So the top one, that is a female. Her name is Cleopatra. And the bottom one is a male. Its name is Magnus. That one is actually alone. So someone had sent him over to me. Actually, Jeremy at SBSF_reptiles, he sent him over to me. So that way we could try to breed like the most saturated and like, the most patterned gargoyles. But the difference between the colors is just through selective breeding, honestly. Like a lot of people go for the reds, and don't get me wrong, they're definitely nice, but honestly, I believe personally the oranges is what it will make that color stand out. It will make it look bright. It will make it pop, especially in person. So the biggest thing that I try to look for in them is the saturation. How deep of an orange or deep of a red is that color? On those scales, if you look up close to them, what makes the difference is, are they fully, is that scale fully covered in red? Or maybe there's just red in the middle and then white on the outside of the scales. It's not going to look as intense of a gecko whenever you look at it. And that's just something that I really like going towards, is the saturation. I think that makes a huge difference on top of the pattern as well.
Okay. Now I've heard things, get the gargoyle hobby. I think I don't want to say untapped, but it's got so much more potential than where it's at right now. So a lot of it is still fairly unexplained or like not common sense. So I've heard some people saying that if you take a striped gargoyle gecko and breed it to a reticulated, you'll get blotched. Can you speak on that? What's your experience with reticulated versus blotched versus striped, and intermixing all of those / keeping them separate?
So I think currently a lot of the blotches that you see have striped mixed into them. And really it just comes down to like having the eye for it and seeing how the patterns mix, because it is genetic for sure, but whenever you do mix them together, you will start seeing like their patterns blend together. You'll start seeing the blotches that, like, they call them the skeletons. It'll be stripes down like you'll see kind of like a striped pattern down the back, but then also blotches along the side. I think if you breed the stripe to a stripe, so I don't think there's a wrong way of breeding them. It definitely comes down to whatever you're interested in or whatever you want to go towards. Whenever you do breed the stripe and the blotch together, I think that's when you create the best patterns all around, because you get the best of both worlds. And it comes down to like you got to go a little bit deeper into it. It comes down to how to actually get that color crossing over certain lines that are, you see like that one, it's going to be delayed a little bit.
Yeah.
But some of the stripes, right, they're usually broken. Like there's a space down the back that's not connected over. There's a space between the lateral color and the dorsal color that isn't connected over as well. If you really want to get the most color on them, I do believe that you have to combine the blotch or the reticulated and the stripes together. But I think you also need a balance of it too. Just because like the male magma that I have, so he is a full back, right? There's barely any color at all. I mean, there's barely any white at all that's down along his back. And that's just what you find with consistent stripes to stripes.
Okay.
So there's a benefit to both, you know, consistent stripes, being bred for a long period of time, consistent blotches being bred for a long period of time. But I think if you want to have the ultimate coverage and some of the coolest patterns, then you will want to take a stripe and a reticulated or blotch and mix them together.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's my man. When I first got into gargoyles, I loved the super blotch look. I thought it was like the most camouflagey slash like gargoyle-y in my head. I used to watch the cartoon
Mhm.
gargoyles, and it kind of has like a marble stone effect, the super blotched, right? The stripe has more of like a racing car effect, which is kind of like I don't want to say like not natural in nature, but that was my explanation for why I really like the blotched. However, I found a really good deal on a baby striped, and I was like, to get my feet wet, I want to buy a striped and get my experience. So I bought like an orange stripe that had really nice striping. But I think what's growing on me more about the stripes is kind of like, I don't know if you see the lineup that I'm showing right now of your geckos that you're showing on the kitchen table here or whatever table that is.
Yeah, it is
But
the kitchen table.
that's a sick lineup. Is that Magma that has the perfect no no break in the middle? It's just perfect color right over the top.
Yep. Hmm.
See, I really like that. It's so like velvety and smooth, as well as when you can see like the two thick dorsal stripes going down the back. Is Magma related to Tiki's Gecko's Deadpool at all, or?
Yeah, so Magma is an offspring of Deadpool, which, if you're into guards, most people are familiar with that. So it's an offspring of Deadpool, and then the female is Scarlett Johansson.
Oh man! So just out of curiosity, uh, did you buy that on sale?
So I actually didn't buy that from Tiki's himself.
Oh,
I
okay.
actually got it from the person that bought it from him.
Okay.
So I was the second owner, pretty much, of him.
Now, I never want anyone to feel uncomfortable about finances, but these are not cheap geckos, correct? So
Yeah.
at this point, are you investing in these geckos more for pets or partially business hobby pets? Or what's your take on where you're at with spending all this money? Because looking at these geckos, they're in the thousands of dollars almost each for some of them. Um, and I don't know how many you have, but it seems like you have a pretty good spread. So, what's your plan with all of these geckos and how much you're spending on them?
I mean, in all honesty, it really comes down to, I guess it could be, it's not in any way a negative thing that I'm trying to say, but I guess it really does come down to somewhat of like, a personal, I guess you can call it like an ego thing. I personally want to be able to create the best gargoyles in the world. At the end of the day, I'm never really basically when I'm looking to buy one, I'm looking at the money as, is this, properly priced? Is this going to, like, if God forbid something happened tomorrow, right, and I need to get rid of these, am I able to at least get my money back out of it? That's the main thing that I think of when I look at the price. So that way I know I'm not getting like ripped off or anything like that or overpaying for something. But honestly, at the end of the day, it really just, the money I would say is going to be, the like a side effect of me just really falling in love with the animals and really just wanting to put a name for myself out there and breed some of the best in the
Okay.
world.
Now, I think what's really cool about gargoyles is it's one of those things where it can always get better, at least at this point, where we are in the gargoyle hobby right now. You could always get more red. You could always get more coverage. There's always a goal to go for. And let me ask your opinion on this, but they're not the fastest growers, right? 1.5 to 2 years before they reach sexual maturity, right? So it's taking a
Yeah.
little time to work these projects, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
Caveat that with leopard geckos, a leopard gecko can reach breeder size in 6 months. So
Oh wow.
that's why the leopard gecko market is not as financially sound right now because almost like anybody can do it as long as you put the time into it. It's a very fast turnaround. But what I see with gargoyles and cresteds, which is similar to ball pythons, it takes much longer to work the projects to get the quality you're looking for to continue that quality. But man, I just love the look of the gargoyle, like their eyes, their face, they're just so like cryptic looking. They're awesome. Um, so not like you have to pick a side per se, but do
Hmm.
you have crested geckos, and what might be a couple of your points for why you like gargoyles more than crested geckos?
So I don't have any crested geckos, and I honestly don't have a desire right now. That might change in the future, but personally, I don't have a desire to it, and that does tie into like the money thing. Is I would never buy like an animal just for the money, because at the end of the day, when you're getting home late, and you still got to clean them and feed them and do all that, what's really going to push you if you're just looking at it just because I can make a couple dollars off of them, or if you really enjoy and have love for those species. So that's my number one rule personally, is it doesn't matter like what type of money or anything is in them. Like I have to have the passion for it, for me to even think about it. But so currently right now I don't have any crested geckos. I don't have much of an interest in them. And I would say the biggest thing is just because of the colors.
Hmm.
I like the bright colors, where a lot of the crested geckos are some of, like, you get different whites and browns and blacks and yellows and some cream, some red. But in terms of the color, I just don't think the gargoyles are kind of matched for
Yeah,
me
they
in
are
my
pretty
eyes.
cool. Now, gargoyles at this moment are no longer a species that we can import wild uh, geckos from, right? So we're as far as we're concerned right now, we have what we have in the hobby, right?
Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% like sure and up to date on that, but I believe you are correct.
Yeah, I think all as far as right now, all New Caledonia. So that would be lychees and chahua, crested gecko, gargoyle gecko, as well as leopard geckos. But that could always change. And, you know, I always think about these kinds of things, but I think it would be good for like the government of New Caledonia to release X amount of wild species into like import or export them out of the country every single year to add fresh blood to the hobby because that would that would uh, not encourage it. What's the opposite of encourage? That would
Discourage.
yeah. I'm so dumb right now. That would discourage like poachers, black market, and all that kind of stuff because no matter what, the animal black market is always going to be there. And the more that you try to make something forbidden, the more that people are going to try to go get it necessarily. So, this is crazy to think about, but 200 years from now, if New Caledonia has not exported new geckos and the gecko hobby is like dying for new blood, I bet you there's going to be a bunch of poachers in Asia and Europe and all that kind of stuff trying to like take little boats out to New Caledonia, catch a bunch of black market wild species and bring them into the European market. It happens with Komodo dragons right now and all kinds of other species that are X listed. So I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for like the New Caledonian government as well as any forbidden species government that has completely canceled exportation to like controlled release, right? Like 5 a year or whatever it might be into the responsible hands of, keepers or whatever. But anyway, so I hope that happens because I think fresh blood is always cool to work with. It keeps the projects fresh and moving in the hobby. But okay, I'm going to stop rambling about my personal thoughts and whatnot.
No, but I do agree because you gotta imagine, I don't know if they realize how much money the animals from that island, from those islands have
Generate.
generated. So there's definitely a way for them to tap into it,
Yeah.
or some type of way that, honestly, that I'm sure the community would be fine with giving back financially as well.
Right.
Like if something like that were to happen. But
And you know what's really cool? They're listed as a threat, or not endangered, but like a potentially threat to become endangered species. But the more that we breed them in captivity, the more they're never going to be completely extinct because we have them in captivity. Even if they became extinct in the wild, we still have the species to study in captivity. So I think, like you said, helping support that would be great. And maybe we'll get to do that one day. There's so much other bigger problems in the world. I'm sure these governments are not really concerned about, gecko keepers, but it's fun to think about as gecko keepers because as a leopard gecko breeder, I always love new blood and wild species, subspecies, all that kind of stuff to be integrating that into the current hobby, because it just produces new stuff, right? But
yeah.
okay, so let me look at my question sheet here because we've just been freestyling it and I want to make sure. Oh, I want to ask, can everybody get the likes up for Jake? So Jake has taken 2 hours of his Thursday night to come and spend time with us. Please, if you guys can, show support to our channel right now that we're streaming on by liking this video. It will recommend it to more people and get both of our names out there more. And also check him out on Red Rhac on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, correct?
Yes.
Um, Now, have you um, uh, solidified that name already? Like redrack.com is yours. That's your domain.
Yeah, I do have that website that that was only a few weeks ago
Oh, that's awesome, man,
that I
because that's
created
like the
that.
perfect name. Like it completely advertises what you're all about and one of the fastest growing trends in gargoyles, which is red. Now, let me ask you this. What happens if you combine like a red blotch or a red stripe with like a yellow base or something? Does it come out orange, like a mix of the colors, or some yellow parts, some red parts, or
Well, it does seem that the red is the dominant color. Even if you do a red and orange stripe together, usually the red is the one that takes over in the offspring. Now, in terms of bases, though, that won't necessarily affect their pattern color, because you can have, which I'm not sure there's much of it out there, like a red base with orange stripes.
yeah.
So pattern is totally different than base colors. So the base will just visually affect what you see because when your eyes are looking at, red and what is it, like yellow together, like those colors combined make orange.
Mhm.
So visually it can affect with your, how you're perceiving it, but overall, like the base won't necessarily affect the pattern. However, when it comes to pattern, the red is usually the dominant, and it's very difficult, like you mentioned. So there is yellow out there. However, it is very difficult to create like a pure yellow line just because of the dominance of the red color. Usually that ends up taking over in the offspring. So it's difficult to get those other colors in there.
Now, as someone who's getting more into red gargoyles right now, are the red bases more frowned upon when you're talking about quality compared to a non-red base? Because when the gecko's fired up, it covers some of the red pattern. So before I spend like $2,000-$3,000 on a gecko, what's your take on how the hobby views red base and red pattern versus a non-red base and red pattern? Which one's favored more?
So I think it really comes down to your preference. However, there is a financial aspect to that as well. I think that like a red base, red, patterned gecko fired up, it looks pretty cool in person because you're talking about a fully, like, from head to tail, it's just going to look like a red, it's just going to be fully red. So it definitely looks really neat in person. However, there's nothing, the color saturation and the pattern is not, the base color will never get as saturated as the pattern.
Okay.
And really, when I'm talking about saturated, I'm talking about, when you look at those colors, like if you were to slide, if you're messing with the photo, you slide the saturation all the way up, right? It takes that light color and it makes it look like really vivid and like dark for whatever color that is. The saturation, in my opinion, is the most important thing. So I see currently right now on my screen, you have the red base female that I have pulled up.
Yeah.
So
she's
fired
awesome.
down, she actually barely has any red pattern on her at all.
Oh.
So if her base was away, you'd pretty much just see a white and black gargoyle right there. So this is where it is important. Red bases, I don't know if they can keep going further in terms of intensity and everything, because mainly what everyone has focused on is the pattern. So I do think there's an opportunity in the bases, and you can find yellow bases and orange bases as well. However, it's always important when you're purchasing a gargoyle to get fired up and fire down pictures, because like for that female, there's no way of telling. In some of them, it's very difficult to tell what is pattern and what is the base. And the base is definitely not as valuable as the pattern.
Okay.
So it's very important that you don't, there are salespeople out there. There are people that when you're inquiring about their animals, they're going to sell you on the potential and like how amazing they are. And they have every right to, they put a lot of time and work and effort into creating that piece of art. However, you have to make that judgment call for yourself. And in my opinion, the red bases aren't as valuable as the pattern. So it's always important to get a fired up and fire down picture because you mainly want to pay depending on the pattern. Like that's how you want to price that animal. And the base is something that can be thrown in as it probably would be slightly more expensive. However, it's not going to make it worth twice as much if it has a
pattern priority first. That's a great way to put it. I appreciate that information. So anyone listening who's thinking about buying a gargoyle, I was kind of thinking that was the right answer, but Jake just kind of confirmed it, at least from both of our perspectives here. Before you spend big money or good money on a gargoyle gecko, make sure that the pattern is really what you want it to be versus just the base color of the animal that fires up yellow or red. I think those are the only two color bases, right? Yellow, red. Then there's like white or whatever.
There's orange. There's an orange base. There's what people call pastel, which will be like a pink base.
Okay. I heard Tiki's talk about that. He said it's pretty rare, right?
Yeah. And it's and that is a whole like another topic, and I have an opinion on that stuff as well. It is definitely like the pastels you'll see, like you can find like purplish, pinkish ones, and then like you said, the red bases, the yellows, orange, and then white. And then you can get like some that may fire up pretty dark, so they have like a brownish or like a little like a blackish base to them.
Okay, nice. So this is just a question. What's your personal take on controversy / being the person that no one has anything bad to say against / being yourself and who cares what people say? What's your balance there? Or because you just said a second ago you have your own opinion on that. How do you feel about sharing your opinion versus keeping it silent as to not like rub certain people the wrong way or something?
I definitely do think there's a fine line in that. And I've personally had it happen to me. Let me switch out the headphones real quick. This one says it's gonna die.
Okay, cool.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, cool. All right, so I've had that run in, unfortunately, where, there was controversy, due to me calling someone else out. However, it was never anything like with their animals or anything like that. It was how they were treating other people and, deceiving other people and that type of stuff. So I do think for me personally, I would always step up for someone if something like that were to happen, and I'm talking like health of animals, lying about lineage or where you're getting them from and, stuff like that. In terms of the other thing about their animals, me personally, I believe if it makes someone happy, then go for it. I have my own goals. I have my own focus on what I want to create. So if something else that someone is into, if they want to, today I saw someone, put on their story about someone, I don't know who it was. It was like the price of the gecko was like $8,000. And they put on their story, like, what is this person smoking or something like that. Me personally, I would never do something like that, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's why when I'm going to purchasing these geckos, I already go in there with my own expectations, my mindset, and my perception of what something is worth. That doesn't mean that something to someone else isn't worth that $8,000. So in terms of that type of stuff and, what people want to do with their breeding projects, I will never jump in and try to put someone down for it. However, that line changes if they're doing something negative and affecting someone else for their own personal gain. Okay, that's when I would be fine with getting into something controversial.
So you like sticking up for the underdog or sticking up for people that get picked on? Yeah, I'm kind of the same way too. So real quick, guys, I see that we're getting a little bit more viewers coming in, and I told myself that I would make it a point to ask for likes, because if you don't ask for likes, they don't happen. And I'm one of those people that like never wanted to ask for likes, but I started watching other live streamers and podcasts, and they're unashamed about asking for it, and their likes actually go up. So please, if you do appreciate this stream, give Jake and I a like right now. Just hit the thumbs up button on the like. It will promote it, share it to more people, and allow more people to chime into this conversation. So appreciate that. And also you can check Jake out on Rhac, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. So tying into that real quick, there's not a ton of gargoyle specific educational videos out there. Tiki's Geckos is probably one of the biggest ones. And of course, as far as New Caledonian species are concerned, he is well into gargoyles. But I would say when you think of Tiki's Geckos, people think crested first, because I think he has like more crested than gargoyle. So you are so gargoyle focused, and your videos came up for me when I was searching about breeding recommendations, care recommendations. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit with you from your experience. So real quick, how long have you been keeping gargoyles and breeding gargoyles?
So keeping them for a little over, I would say 7 years now.
Wow, okay.
And breeding for about 5 years.
So that's a good amount of experience, coupled with the people you've learned from.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I don't think it's a lot, because then I talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for like 15, 20 years. Yeah. So when I'm talking to them, I shut my mouth. Yeah. And I listen to what they have to say. So
that's cool, Jake. I mean, I think your humble personality and perspective is definitely going to bring you far. So since you won't toot your own horn, I'll toot it. 7 years is a decent amount of time and personal experience to be in a hobby, especially for someone who cares about the animals as much as you do. And I really liked your answer as far as like why to get into certain reptiles, specifically gargoyles for you. A lot of people just think about the finances and the money, but if you do that it's just, I don't think it's going to work. You're going to lose passion when you're cleaning poop at 3 o'clock in the morning after a long day of work, or things aren't selling on MorphMarket, or your YouTube channel's not taking off and you just feel crummy after putting in thousands of hours of editing videos. So, like you said, the passion's got to be there for the animals. And there's nothing wrong with growing at a slow pace and seeing if the business side winds up being for you. But you do have a pretty decent presence on YouTube, and I definitely think your subscriber count and whatnot will continue to grow as time goes on, as the gargoyle gecko hobby gets promoted more, because you're one of the few people out there that are so specific focused. And it's great to have someone who releases content that is specific focused. So let's get into care a little bit, since you have a lot of decent experience with these guys. And all of this is going to be based off of your preferences. I completely understand that, but feel free to explain why you think the way you do. So let's talk about setup first. I had a really bad experience with my first gargoyle baby this year, and I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you what I think went wrong, and you could give me your feedback on that. So, watching Tiki's geckos, he said that gargoyle babies tend to fight when paired together. So I wanted to pair my gargoyle geckos separate and set them up in separate tubs. Because of that, I was thinking on mass scale, even though I don't have a lot of babies yet. I put the little gargoyle in a little plastic container, put a bunch of holes in it, like 5 holes on top, 5 holes around the sides. I put Eco Earth as a substrate, a little water dish in there, food dish, and like a little plant. And I think, and the gecko died 3 weeks later. I think listening to a podcast that Tiki was doing, he said that baby gargoyles and baby cresteds are actually extra sensitive to extra humid conditions. And if their environment is too humid, they can actually catch respiratory infections and die. And I think that's what happened to mine. What might be your feedback as far as my explanation and your experience with setting up babies and that topic of respiratory infections and whatnot?
So, thankfully, I've had very few health issues with any of my animals. We can get into that too, like the ones that I have had as well. But so I've never dealt with like any respiratory issues or anything like that. I do think there's always that trial and error period for your first, animal of a certain species, because you need to get used to their personality, what like their habits and that type of stuff. It's just like when someone gets a snake, just like they can read a dog, you can read the body language. You can tell if it's in a good mood, if it's in a bad mood, if you should leave it alone, if it's okay for you to pick it up. So there's definitely nothing wrong. I mean, unfortunately, it does happen.
Yeah, I was so sad, man.
I
say it kind of, I'm not like crying now or anything, but when I opened that tub and it was just dead, I was like, oh my gosh, my first gargoyle. Not only was it great genetics, but it's just always sad seeing a dead animal, right? So
yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely understand where you're coming from. I personally have always put I personally like to do slightly more ventilation than less, just because with the less ventilation, just in terms of like their enclosure, you do run into more issues where, like the substrate isn't dry. Well, for me, it'd be paper towels. If I don't have enough ventilation and then I go in the next day to spray and that paper towel is still wet, I know, that's not a good situation for any of them. And what that also does cause too is, like, especially for poop or leftover food, or really with cork bark, or whenever you're using like any natural things in their enclosures, it's going to start growing mold and everything a whole lot faster when something's a lot more moist. Now, in terms of the substrate, I don't know about the respiratory infection. Never had that issue. In terms of the substrate, though, I have been told by one of those 15, 20-year people that they do not like to use coconut
cocoa fiber.
Cocoa fiber, yeah. They do not like to use the cocoa fiber. The reason being is I've even seen it in females, because I do have it in their lay boxes, where cocoa fiber, when you spray it down, if it's completely dry, it's pretty hydrophobic. I don't know if you've seen that. Like, you can literally have a whole thing of dry, cocoa fiber, and you pour water into that tub, the water will go underneath it. It doesn't. It's not like soil that you would have outside when it's dried out. It takes a little bit for that water to actually absorb into that, and that's an issue because there's two things to that. The first thing is when it is dry and you do something like that, now you have an issue, just because this water isn't absorbing into that. You're going to have pools of water into there. This other thing, though, is eventually when that does absorb into that cocoa fiber, it's very easy for it to stick to the gecko's skin. And I've had this happen in the females' lay boxes. It will stick and it will dry to their skin, especially if, say, they stepped into their thing of Pangea, which happens a lot, especially with babies. Then when it comes time to shedding, that skin just doesn't come off. So it can create some serious issues in terms of like their shedding and that type of stuff whenever you use the cocoa fiber. So me personally, it's not something that I enjoy using just because it's a hassle to use whenever it dries out and you spray it back on. It doesn't just mix well for me. And then the other thing too, if you do keep it moist all the time, then like you said, I mean, it's absolutely possible to cause respiratory issues as well.
So yeah, I'm in Arizona, so
yeah,
it's super dry. That's why I did it that way. But I don't know if you saw a second ago, I was showing one of your videos where you actually melt a hole and then you put screen over it, right?
Yeah.
And in my experience now, and I'm going to ask you if this is your opinion, it's pretty good to have at least one or two of those screen things on the tub, right? Whether it's adults or babies, because that allows for more fresh ventilation to come in.
Yeah, definitely. What my enclosures look like now, they didn't look like them 5 years ago, and they probably won't look like what they will be in 5 years from now, right? It's always kind of like growing as not only as you get more animals, but also you learn what your preferences are and what works best for them. I find the screens are the best because it's going to allow much better airflow. And me personally, I like the enclosures to not be super dry, but I want them by the next time I go to spray them down, I want them to be dry. So by adding that larger ventilation, just makes it easier to, air out that enclosure in between sprayings.
Oh, so yeah, that'll tie into my next topic. Do you use water bowls or misting, and how often for either one if you do?
So I've personally never tried using water bowls, so I don't know. I won't speak on that. Misting, I do it once per day and before I go to bed, just because the mist, depending on your ventilation, it can dry out in a few hours. So if I did it in the morning, by the time they're awake, there's not going to be much droplets and stuff, all around their enclosure, which is an issue because that's, if you don't have a water bowl like I don't, right, that's how they are going to get their water from other than when they're eating. Mm-hmm. So I mist all the enclosures once a day before I go to bed. So that way they're already awake. It's nighttime. So they, right as soon as I spray them, they're already ready to start, drinking that water.
Is it just like yeah, go ahead.
And also, because that's their daytime, that's when I want, it to be the most humid for them.
That's when they're active and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Is it just like a 3-second spray pretty much? Like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, like nothing crazy, right?
It just depends on the size of the enclosure. And again, it just comes down to You spraying it one day, you wake up the next day,
If it's still wet, don't spray. Right?
it's still wet. All right, so now I'm gonna put that in my head. All right, so I'm gonna, tonight I'm just gonna spray it 1 second less.
Okay.
So it's just
So it is a daily thing for you when spraying, because
mhm.
there's a lot of opinions out there, obviously, and there's a lot of ways that work, but everyone
Yeah.
finds their own. So some people are more on like a 2 or 3 day schedule for like food and spray, and that's actually the schedule that I've been on, being primarily a leopard gecko breeder and busy with a lot of animals. Um, and I'm going to probably figure out that a daily thing might work best. But for now, I've just pushed it to like every 2 to 3 days, changing the food. And then when I change the food, I spray. But I didn't used to do this, but now I actually keep a water bowl in there just in case. And then the next time, it's a disposable bowl. So the next,
Mhm.
after 3 days, I'll come back, toss that bowl, and put that one in. So that seems to work pretty good. It's a little extra water in there for them, for me and like
Yeah.
my setup here. But yeah, I was just curious if you didn't have water bowls, how often you sprayed, and it seems like once a day it works really good for you, right?
Correct.
Now, do female gargoyle geckos, in your experience, tend to lose a lot of weight during breeding season, or is it only circumstantial, meaning they're in with the male too long, or they're in with another female? If they're kept by themselves and fed regularly and misted, they don't really tend to lose weight, or can they even lose weight and go on food strikes and stuff when they're pregnant, like gravid?
So there's a lot of different factors to that. And at the end of the day, when they lay eggs, they're gonna drop some grams. But the most important thing is to make sure you're up on that so that way they could do as good as they can to get that weight back into them. The biggest issue though that you will find, like in terms of weight drops, is just the stress, of having that male in with them and them breeding. Most of the time, you won't have issues. However, whenever you do, it's important that you act on it quick, because especially not only are the eggs, taking a big toll on that female, but now if she's not eating too, just because she's stressed out or getting bullied, that can really, between those two factors can really be a negative thing. So it's both of those, they're gonna drop weight regardless whenever they lay that clutch of eggs. It's up to you, or also them, the team effort, to try to get that weight back onto them um before that next clutch drops. However, you can also run into just pairing issues where the female isn't eating, and then that can be dangerous, because if she doesn't have enough nutrients in her body, you don't want her body to be in overdrive, trying to produce eggs.
So, do you feed the same thing to a breeding female as you would to the rest of your gargoyles year round? Is it a certain mix or bugs or?
No, it's the same thing. However, I am going to monitor them, and if I know they are losing a bit more weight, then I'm going to offer them more bugs than I normally would.
Okay. We got a couple people in the chat asking about your opinion on bioactive and the gargoyles eating the isopods and stuff like that. So, from your experience, can you just speak your mind on whether you've done bioactive or if that's good or bad?
Yeah, so I personally have done it for a short period of time. However, for my, what I have going on, it's just not a practical thing. And I do believe it requires, in my opinion, it requires a little bit more work, just because now you aren't only taking care of just the gecko, you have your cleanup crew, you have, you got to make sure the substrate is right, you got to make sure the plants, the lighting, all that type of stuff. So for me, it's easier. Right in the back here is just morning geckos. So I've just let that thing grow out as much as possible when they're back there. So I don't have any gargoyles in there. But I do think it will be best if you wait till your gecko is an adult before you put it into a bioactive enclosure, just because, as you experience when they're young, that's when you're going to have to deal with the health issues. So the easiest way to monitor them is when their enclosure is much more simple setup, and maybe you have like something like, just paper towels or whatever. You can see that they're pooping, they're eating, all that type of stuff. And also, you wouldn't want that little baby, to go in, because I'm sure an isopod to a baby gargoyle gecko is going to be way more appealing than to something that's a little bit bigger and it's looking at like this tiny little thing run around. So the issue is just like with any reptile is the potential for the impaction, when they're going to eat that animal. And it has happened, same with like crested geckos. It has happened where, people have found their gecko dead with a bunch of dirt in their mouth in a bioactive enclosure. So you just have to be careful. I suggest you waiting until it's an adult enclosure before you do that. But I don't think you would have an issue, and I don't think that would, hurt like their health or anything like that by putting them into a bioactive enclosure.
I talk about this a lot on our channel about risk, right? So for leopard geckos, a lot of questions we get asked are, can females live together? Can a male and a female live together? And, for a lot of answers, it comes down to risk. How much risk are you comfortable, having in your setup? Because certain setups are less risky than other setups. And so anyway, cool. Great answer. Lewis Family Geckos asks, do gargoyles typically reach adulthood at 2 years? So
it depends, because you can have a 3-year-old gargoyle gecko that's 30 grams. And so what do you consider adulthood? Is it an age? Is it weight? Is it both? Is it them being able to breed? So it really depends. I've had a gecko at 1 year be 50 grams, and it's a female. So because it's a female, though, and even at a male, there's no way I would think about pairing that up, just because it's not sexually mature. So it just depends on what you consider adulthood. If you talk about sexually mature, which I would assume you are, it can vary between them. Male's going to get there a little bit sooner. And the other thing, too, about the male is they don't necessarily have to be as big. So it does help them getting there sooner. But I would say most of the time females are going to be between 2 to 2.5 years. And a male will be probably between 1.5 to 2 years.
Okay.
If they hit their weight. If they hit their weight, then, right around that time.
Now, like your one female that hit her weight in a year, I'm just curious about this, but why would she be the size of a sexually mature gecko but not sexually mature? Is it that she can't breed because her organs aren't developed, or that it's just like a preference of people not to breed gargoyles that young because maybe they're going to lay infertiles, or what would be your like kind of perspective on that?
Well, I don't know. I am not a scientist, so, disregard me in that fact. But it's just like, right, a human being can be different sizes, right? You can have a 6 foot tall, if we're talking about like puberty, when someone becomes sexually mature, the size isn't necessarily like a factor. Yeah, exactly. It's more about what's going on the inside. And you'll find out most females won't lay their first set of dud eggs till about 2 to 2.5 years.
Okay.
So me personally, that's why I've always waited. However, I don't know what the science is behind it, where if you looked inside of them, like, do they have the proper organs and hormones and everything like that to lay eggs at a year if they hit the size?
And that's a common method that I've seen people use is, it's funny, wait for duds and then pair, right? That's like a common method for gargoyle gecko breeders to do. So like females will lay a set of infertile eggs, and then you'll just pair her that next month or over the next couple of days so that the next clutch she has will be fertile. Now, do you experience a particular season for gargoyles, or do you just put the male with the female year round, kind of every so often, you know?
Well, me personally, because I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is it gets cold here. Like right now, it's probably like
30
what? It's
less.
yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. What's going on, Jake? Can you
All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. See what I mean about
Okay.
technical difficulties? It's always crazy. So I'm gonna see if the YouTube, I think the live stream is still running right now. So I'm just going to wait for it to kind of reset. But let me know, guys, in the chat if everything is okay. Unable to connect to chat. Please try again later. Chat disconnected. Please wait while we try to reconnect you. So let's just give it a minute here. And hopefully, fingers crossed, everything will just be an easy transition in. Says the stream.
Yeah, I see the chat. They're saying
oh, really?
it's running.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe it's just on my end. There's a little bit of a lag or something. I'm not seeing the chat, which is okay if that winds up being the case. Let me refresh this page real quick. Okay, yeah, I hear and see both of you. Okay, so I think I'm cool. So I think we're back. Everybody, let me know if you cannot hear or see us, or if there winds up becoming an issue. But Jake, you were talking about what were you talking about again? If you could just the last thing I think what topic were we talking about, and then I'll remember where you
I
were
think
at.
someone asked a question.
Yeah, it was. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, somebody
Oh,
asked.
bioactive. That's what it was.
Yeah, the bioactive. Sorry, we could start. We could start a new question if you want. If you don't remember where you left off or anything like that, or did you have anything to tie into what you were just saying, like, and wrap up on that topic?
Well, if it was the bioactive, because honestly, I don't remember. But uh, I don't know. Basically, it definitely comes down to preference. If you want to put, it's going to require a little bit more effort to put your geckos in there. But I would say, if you want the easiest way, just wait till they're an adult.
Okay, and that's good advice. So how often do you clean your tubs, and how often do you feed as well?
So cleaning them, I find that the smaller the gecko and the enclosure, the dirtier they end up getting. I don't know why
Okay.
that is, but it just seems like um, I need to clean them off more often. So most of my enclosures are gonna get cleaned um, between 1 to 2 times a month,
One
usually.
to two times a month. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's even
Um,
with you spraying. It doesn't get too musty in there with the poo or anything. Do you use a lot of decor or like kind of limited? Um,
so my biggest things are that I use is cork rounds. I like the rounds because it gives them a place to feel secure and, fully 360 be covered up.
Hmm.
And fake plants. Those are the
Oh,
main
okay.
things I use.
So a lot of that naturally takes on some poo, right? They poo on a fake plant, they poo on the cork bark, so that it's not all like sitting on the bottom. So when you spray, it's like a muddy pool of like poopy water down there, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Once I do see it get, like, if there's too much poop and stuff before, because usually it'll be like every 2 weeks is when I'll clean it. If there's anything before that, then yeah, I'll go in there and just switch out the paper towels or wipe it down or do whatever I need to do real quick. But
okay.
yeah, I haven't had any issues.
Now somebody did remind us where we were at or what we were talking about. It was about sexual maturity in the
Oh yeah,
gargoyles. Yeah.
that's what it was. Okay.
So your preference is wait till she does duds or till she's about two, 2.5, right?
It just depends. Number one, because it doesn't matter if they're 5 years old. I'm gonna wait until they at least hit 50 grams.
Okay.
So I would say that's the most important thing. And then the duds are going to help because if they say they lay duds at 1 year and 10 months, then from there, all right, you're good to go. Sometimes they lay duds at 2.5 years. Sometimes they just don't ever lay duds until they're paired up with a male. So I make sure that the female is 50 grams and then either wait 2.5 years unless she lays duds before.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Another question coming in live is I moved my gargoyle geckos to a bigger tank 12 days ago and they haven't eaten since. Will they be okay? Can you speak a little bit to that of environments changing and bigger versus smaller and also decor maybe making them feel safe and whatnot?
Mm. Yeah, so that's going to happen to an adult. It doesn't matter how if it's going to happen to a baby, it's going to happen to an adult. I personally think like the most thorough gargoyle breeders out there is Gargoyle Queen Reptiles. That's where I got this one, my first ever gargoyle.
Nice.
And she puts a lot of time into like tracking things and and being organized and doing all that with all of her animals. And she put out before where she tracked the growth rate of a gargoyle gecko. And she tracked and put down on the chart whenever she moved the things in the enclosure around.
Oh,
And it wasn't even going to a larger enclosure. It was just moving the items around. Every time that she did that, right, it dropped in weight. Then eventually it would go
really?
back up. But every
Okay.
time she did that, it dropped in weight. So that's going to happen no matter what size or age or anything like that. If you're going to change their habitat, they're going to, not all the time, but most of them are probably not going to eat for a few days. They're going to be a little bit stressed out,
Yeah.
right? It's not what they're used to. Whenever I upgrade them, I don't know if it makes a difference or not, but I will always take like one piece of their decor and move it into their bigger enclosure. So that way, at least like their scent is still on that. And they have something familiar in there versus, everything has no scent or, they aren't sure of the enclosure or anything like that. So if you want to just make sure for your peace of mind, well, one, that's okay if they aren't eating. And sometimes you won't even know that they aren't. You'll think that they aren't eating, but they actually are. So it's completely normal that you change the enclosure and their weight is going to take a little dip, or maybe they aren't going to eat. But just make sure the husbandry in terms of the humidity, temperature, and all that type of stuff. Just make sure that is consistent. As long as you have that in check, eventually they're going to be eating again. And just like anyone says, for them, when people say like their babies aren't eating or whatever, or if they're pooping, they're fine,
Yeah.
right? If you look in there and then you start seeing like their hip bones protruding, or there's not as much meat around their legs, okay, maybe maybe you move them into a way bigger enclosure that they're comfortable with. Maybe you should move them back. But visually and on a scale, if you look at them and they look like a healthy animal, they have fat and that type of stuff on their body, then don't worry about it. Just be consistent with the humidity, temperature, giving them the hiding spots, and eventually they're going to get right back into it.
Yeah, that's good advice. I saw some documentary or somebody talking about, maybe it was even one of your videos, how crested geckos and leopard geckos, they kind of like scent mark when they find their food. So they'll find like where you put the Pangea and they'll make a scent mark there. So if you move into a different case, they need to like reestablish their whole scent marking and whatnot. And like you said, it might be more serious with some geckos rather than other geckos. But it is something that can happen. The same guy that asked the question said, good info because my wife always rearranges her gargoyle tank. So yeah, you typically don't want to rearrange things. Touching on the breeding thing and dropping weight first of all, Jake has some great videos on his YouTube channel about gargoyle gecko setup, breeding, food, all of the stuff we're talking about right now if you want to be more in detail. But before I saw your video on breeding gargoyle geckos, I had a trio together, 2 females and 1 male, and I noticed a lot of weight drop in everybody, the male and the 2 females. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to individually breed then. I'm going to keep the female separate, the other female separate, the male separate, and just rotate him through. Then I saw your breeding video about how you prefer to do it that way because of exactly what I mentioned, where they tend to get stressed out when kept in groups and they can lose weight really easily. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's great to know about this species. But yeah, comparatively to like crested geckos, which you can keep in a lot of groups and normally don't experience issues, it does seem that gargoyles do tend to stress out a little bit more, right, when kept in groups. And so keeping them individually and rotating the male through can be a good format for breeding. Is that correct, like what you do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the more you have in there, the more factors you have for it potentially going wrong. The more chances that you have for one not getting along with the other. So I personally, because then you run into that dilemma, all right, you have 1 male and 2 females. So how are you going to make that work? So you can rotate the male into the female's enclosures and line it up with their cycle of laying. So that way, once they lay their eggs, right, maybe give them a day or 2 to recover, and then put that male back in the enclosure with them for about a week, 10 days, take him out. The other one lays her eggs, put it back in with her for about a week, 10 days, take them out. That way you're still breeding both of those females. But it is possible for the female to retain sperm. However, I found that if you pair the male to the female once, she may lay, a clutch or 2, but more than likely it ends up dropping off after that. So you have to stay consistent with that if you want her to lay throughout the full season and continually lay eggs.
Now, how many clutches will they typically lay in a year?
So it does depend on the female, right? Like this girl, and this is why it's like I can get into hours of talking about why this is so important, about so many questions to ask when it comes to purchasing animals. But this female right here, she only lays 1 egg at a time, okay, right? And that can happen with gargoyle geckos, and I'm sure other geckos
always,
as well.
Even when she was younger, a gecko?
Yeah, it's no matter what, she only lays 1 egg at a time, which pretty much what that means is, since, okay, again, I'm not a scientist, so I might be screwing up the terms and stuff, right? They have 2 ovaries, and one of them could have been damaged or have a genetic issue or something like that. So only one ovary is producing an egg. So that's why it's important, off topic, to always, when you're buying breeding females and stuff, asking how many eggs does she lay every clutch. That's important. But every female's also different as well, just because their weight could have dropped a ton, and maybe you had to separate them and they didn't have a full season. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but I would say on average, you're going to get probably between 4 to 5 clutches.
Okay. Now, do you know the longevity of gargoyle geckos and how late into their life they can lay or breed?
I don't know that. I don't, because people have lasted more than, 5 years breeding them, right? But if you do the research and you look at the other people that have been into it for a long time, what you will find is over time, the female eventually becomes less and less productive. And then that's just a, personal question for yourself is if she's laying, only 2 eggs a year, should I, continue breeding her, or should I let her retire and do her thing? But I think they're all different. You'll get many different opinions where they'll say, oh, she's 15 years old, she still lays four clutches a year, or you get one that's 10 years old, I just retired her, she was only laying, 1 clutch a year.
So gargoyles, they're pretty long-lived gecko species, right? I think if you were to like Google how long does a crested gecko live, you're going to get 15 to 20 years. But if you Google how long does a gargoyle gecko live, you actually get like 20 to 25 or something. And that's just a Google, right? But do you think that gargoyle geckos have a pretty long lifespan? Do you know the oldest gargoyle that you've ever heard of? Or
Well, this girl right here is the oldest one that I own. She was born in 2013.
okay, so
Other than
makes
that, I mean, I've heard of like other ones being obviously like 20 years old and that type of stuff. But you also have to think, I mean, really, when did they even start importing,
yeah,
these animals? Sometime in the 90s. I'm sure you can find it out. So there's only a handful of animals that have been bred in captivity and from day one probably lived out like a full lifespan, if that's even happened yet.
Yeah. I heard I don't know if you know about this, but I heard Tiki's Geckos talking about like some record size gargoyle being like 150 grams from like Pangea, or I don't know, one of those people that are, you know what I mean? Have you heard of that big gargoyle?
So
do you know who it is?
On Facebook, so I don't know about like maybe necessarily the one that he's talking about, but on Facebook, and he has an Instagram too, but I saw the post on Facebook. Okay. ROC Geckos.
ROC Geckos.
He has a gargoyle gecko that he puts side by side with his Leachianus gecko, and they were pretty much like the same size. So it was well over like 100 grams. I just can't. It probably was posted in like one of the gargoyle gecko groups or something like that.
Okay.
I think his name is Tony.
Let's see. I think I have him up here on the screen. ROC Geckos. I won't take too much time to look for the photo, but I just wanted to show people his platform if somebody did want to kind of dig a little bit. So that would be crazy. And it wasn't super chunky, right? Was it just, it was just big all around?
Yeah, it was just a large animal. Yeah.
So 2-part question. What do you think he was feeding it? And what diets do you think is best for your collection?
Well, I believe at that point it's going to be genetics. Obviously, there is a nutritional fact, just like a baby, a human baby. If you don't give it the right nutrition throughout its life, it's going to be stunted. And that's probably the same way with, the geckos as well. If you don't give them the right nutrition, especially when they're, young and developing, their growth most likely is going to be stunted. But when it comes turn to like getting that like over 100 grams for a gargoyle gecko, it's definitely going to be genetics. And in terms of the diet, I think pretty much at this point, like Pangea is probably the best bet out there for like all around like nutrition and that type of stuff. And insects can increase their growth rate but I think genetics are the one that has to play with how big they can actually get.
Now, what's the other competitor to Pangea? There is another food source. And they
Rapashi.
Rapashi, and they actually advertise Rapashi with a gargoyle gecko on it. So like
Mm-hmm.
you would think, I heard way back that like Rapashi was better. It's higher in protein, blah blah blah. But I couldn't really get my geckos hooked on Rapashi. I can get my geckos hooked on Pangea, and I usually use Pangea with insects anyway. You know the mixed Pangea with insects. But have you used both, or do you find that Pangea works best? And what Pangeas do you like to use for your geckos?
So I like to use the red bag, which is just fruit and insects.
The
It's not
original one,
like,
right? Yeah.
yeah, it's not even like a flavor. It's just fruit and insects. I mean, if you really compare like the nutritional facts between the different flavors, not much is different if you look at it. So that's what I've used. That's what I've always used. I mean, if I got to buy a different flavor, I will. You know, I haven't had any issues with that. But I
Okay,
personally
cool.
also have never tried many of the other diets. The only one I've actually ever tried was the Leapin' Lychees
Oh yeah, how was that?
gecko diet. And they just didn't really, there was not much of a response for it,
Okay.
for that, which I'm not saying is a bad diet. That
Right.
could just be that the geckos were so used to like the same thing for so long.
Right.
But I've never really like sat down and like experimented with like a long-term change in their diet and stuff.
And when I was first getting into gargoyles, I heard some breeders recommending like you don't want your gargoyle getting hooked on one type of Pangea. So I bought multiples, but then the problem you experience is they don't like certain Pangeas, and so now they're not growing as fast, not breeding as well, or females are not eating as much. So I think this is just my personal thought. I'd rather the gecko be eating. So whatever the gecko eats, I just want it eating that. But
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah, I was wondering your experience. And you said you feed every day, Pangea, or
So this is another thing too. It not only should evolve or revolve around the animals' requirements, but also I do believe it should revolve around your life because we
mm,
everyone has a different life, everyone has different responsibilities, everyone has a different work schedule. You know, it's not that bad whenever you have one or two or a handful of geckos. That's real easy. However, when it takes an hour and a half, 2 hours to feed, then that's going to be important to figure out what your schedule is because if you in your personal life have a bunch of stuff going on, right? You don't want that effect. You don't want that to affect your care. So you want to have that same mentality, and that's what I have. You know, that's what I've taken over with these. That same mentality of you setting your goals for your YouTube channel. You setting your goals for your personal life, you bring that same work ethic that you have in other areas of your life into something like this if you're really passionate about it. So in terms of the feed schedule, it should be you want to put yourself on a schedule that you can stay consistent on. That's one of the most important things is to stay consistent. And everyone, I guarantee it, has not fed their gecko on the day that they were supposed to be fed. And, they had something going on, whatever. It's okay. However, I don't think it's probably, if you want the best growth out of your animals, I don't think it should be, all over the place. So basically for my schedule, what I feed them is on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Fridays.
okay, 3 times a week,
So
about.
three
Yeah.
times a week. I'm not loading up their bowls either, right? That's another thing too. They don't need to have, a giant tub of, food in their enclosure. I'm
Yeah.
gonna put in there what I know is a reasonable amount that they could eat in one session. So that way, I mean, mainly that's for me. That way, I know I'm not wasting it.
Right. And then do you tongue feed bugs throughout the week as well, or how does that work for you?
So I've never. Only one time, and that was with her when I first got her. I put a little cup in there and put dubia roaches in it. That's the
Okay.
only time I've ever not have been actively involved in their feeding insects. It works for a lot of people. However, I don't know. I guess it's just for my personal sake and peace of mind. I use the tong, so I know, like, all right, this one ate some, this one didn't. That way I know. I visually know that they ate them or they didn't.
Okay. And you
And
do
they're
have
like
some
running around.
YouTube videos I saw on tips and tricks for getting them to eat off of tongs and whatnot. But how often so if you guys want to see more in detail about that, please check out his YouTube channel. Lots of great videos. I get this comment a lot. A lot of people are like, "Oh, your channel's underrated, right?" But your channel, my friend, is severely underrated. My boy over here is only at like almost 400 subscribers. So let's get that number up. Anyone who's watching now, or share it with your friends, because I definitely think you're worthy of. You got great information. That's the only reason I would have you on the show. I wouldn't want to bring somebody on who was sharing bad information. So I know you're a humble dude and everything, but again, I'm gonna toot your horn a little bit. Jake, 7, 8 years experience specifically with gargoyle geckos. Lots of YouTube videos out there. So please check out his channel, Red Rhac, and subscribe. I think that you will not be disappointed. Lots of tips and tricks. But how often do you feed dubias then to your geckos each week?
So most of the time, it's actually only going to be probably um, like within a because when you feed insects to a larger collection and you're tong feeding, that takes up a lot of time
Yeah, for
to
sure.
individually get all of them, pull them out, feed them, and then put them back and do all that. It takes a lot of time. So I'll actually only feed insects probably once or twice a month.
And will you dust like calcium with D3 vitamins?
Yeah, yeah, I will. Yeah, yeah, I definitely dust the insects as well.
Okay, cool. I'm experimenting with the bowl method right now, like you talked about. I have a disposable cup, um, and I put some insects in that little bowl. And cockroaches are escape artists. They're going to get out. If the gecko steps in it, they'll climb on the gecko and get out. But what I do look for, like a little tip that I look for to see if the gecko's eating, does it look chunky this week? If it looks chunkier than normal, then I can kind of reason in my head, okay, this gecko's getting some bugs, because bugs, when you tell me if this is your experience, but when you get your goggle or crested gecko eating bugs, they grow like crazy. That was my experience with it. They just like just shoot up in size like so much faster than just off Pangea.
Yeah, absolutely. As an adult,
You don't need that as much,
it's
right? So,
yeah, like if they're an adult, honestly, especially if it's like a male and they're at a healthy weight and they're eating Pangea, I will even say it's okay. Like as long as if they're healthy, they're not losing weight or anything. I would say it's even okay if you don't ever even feed them an insect.
yeah.
But like you said, when it comes to a baby, if you really want them to take off and start growing fast, the insects are definitely key to that.
So crickets and dubias mainly you recommend.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about substrate, we talked about food, water, setup, we talked about breeding. What about your goals for breeding? I think you might have touched on it early on, but you love, love, love the red and specifically like the brightest, most saturation you can get. What are some of your personal goals for the projects you're working? Do you have names of any projects? Like, have you personally coined any names for projects, or just have like males and females that you're like, oh yeah, I want to pair these two together?
So I mean, all the adults have names. However, it's not like I'm not naming a specific line like this is the whatever line.
Okay.
You know, I personally don't even think I'm there yet. That I think at that point, if you want to do something like that, you're going to need generations of animals to back up the evidence that whatever specific trait that you're breeding for is a consistent trait. So when I sell you this animal, you know what you're getting and you know exactly what that's going to produce and bring into your own bloodlines as well. So in
Okay.
terms of lines or anything like that, I'm not there yet. Maybe someday, but not right now. My personal goals for like the actual geckos is to create some of the like most unique geckos in the world.
Gotcha.
And that's not necessarily just red, or saturation or anything. I mean, it has a lot to do with it, honestly. But I do believe that orange is a super underrated color.
Yeah,
And whenever you
for
look
sure.
at an orange, whenever I have those two out that you have right now, and I look at them side by side, the orange color shines 10 times brighter than the red.
Okay. And that's kind of
However,
like an
because
orangey red, right? Very saturated.
if you yeah, it is like a orangey red, but however, if you see it in person, like you can totally
It's just
tell the
bright
difference.
orange,
Like
huh?
this isn't orange. That's what the orange does to it. When you get a super saturated orange, it basically looks like it's glowing.
Okay,
And
nice.
I think because orange is a little bit more difficult because so many lines of geckos have had red into them, if you're able to fully isolate, the orange color and produce consistently orange geckos, I think that is a truly untapped, totally distinctive line that you could create from that. So I
Okay.
think that is definitely a focus that someone could capitalize on in terms of like not trying to. 'Cause whenever you have a hobby that's been around or a reptile hobby that's been around for years, right? There's a certain level of breeders that is just very difficult to catch up to because they're
Yeah.
so like their collection and what they have just so far ahead. So if you really want to stand out for yourself, you have to try to figure out like what is something a little bit different. And I think orange is something that is definitely different if you're able to successfully do that. So that's definitely one of my goals. Having fully covered geckos is one of my goals as well, especially with the consistent producing of the full backs where there's no line going down the middle.
Yeah.
So that's what my goal with Magma is,
Man,
and
that
his
one's great.
one of his babies is really promising for that, and you'll start seeing too a lot more with the eyebrow color popping up like on their head and stuff.
Oh, really?
So I think there's a lot of potential with that. However, just like you said, it's totally, totally untapped. Yeah, if you look up Philip Tremper, if you look
Philip
Philip
Trump.
Tremper, yep, and he has like a really amazing one with a ton of coverage. But the gargoyle geckos are untapped. I want to be able to produce the some of the most unique in the world. However, there's no like true genetics involved in them yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
there's
was
stripe blotch, but there's not, with leopard geckos, right? You have to figure out what's recessive, what's dominant, all that type of stuff. That just doesn't happen with gargoyle geckos yet.
now caveat to that. The only actual like recessive dominant thing is the phantom eye, right? But we don't really know whether it is recessive or dominant, or we don't really know much about it yet, right?
Yeah, and me personally, I do see again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. When it comes to animals, it's a
Yeah.
piece of art, right? It's what someone's perceived value is of that.
Right.
So there's nothing that someone could look at a black and white gargoyle gecko and love that 100 times better than a fully saturated gargoyle gecko. So
Yeah.
when it comes to phantom eyes, just another opinion. I don't believe currently right now that they are worth more than anything else.
Right.
So yeah, like you said, there's not much info about that in terms of like if it does end up leading onto any other traits or anything like that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I don't know when Lily White popped up for crested geckos. Now they have the Xanthic line and possibly like some weird scaleless thing that popped up in Europe recently. But anyway, it's always cool because as you breed geckos more and more, you don't know what could possibly pop up. The really good thing about, again, going back to our earlier conversation about importation, one of the reasons why the ball python market is so sustainable is because new genes are popping up every year because we can still import them from the wild, and we find the Africans over there, they find unique looking snakes, they send it over here for testing, and what do you know, we find out it's a new gene. That happens like once or twice a year for ball python. So that would be so cool if we could do that for like crested geckos and gargoyle geckos, taking some from the wild, entering in new genes. But for now, we're working with what we're working with. But even that being said, new stuff still can mutate. That's why it's called a mutation. It can mutate, and it can happen even in captivity. And I'm hoping that some pretty cool stuff comes for gargoyles. But for now, the line breeding aspect of color, saturation, the spread of pattern, that's keeping the gargoyle gecko hobby plenty busy for the time being, correct?
Yeah, definitely. It's just like the crested geckos, like you said. The lily whites, the xanthics, the melanistics, that only popped up within the last however many years.
Yeah.
So there's still a ton of potential with them.
Really cool. Well, thanks for speaking a little to your breeding goals. I think what you said is great, differentiating yourself, but not only are you differentiating yourself. Now you work with red and orange, but like you said, you're differentiating yourself in the sense that you're going to have bright orange geckos, but it also looks really, really cool, and I think will be just as desirable as red as time goes on. So that's a great project goal of yours, and I'll be keeping an eye out for that. Let's move on from care specific. Let's see. We got about 20 minutes, so we're going to do some fun kind of, wait, do I want to hit wrap up questions yet? Hold on. Let me see here. Before I hit some wrap up questions and then some like fun hot seat questions, do you have any topics that you feel like we didn't cover or anything that really excites you about gargoyles that you'd like to speak on?
I mean, mainly, I would say like the biggest thing is they're just like most animals. They're like pieces of art, So when it comes to like your breeding and that type of stuff, don't ever think that just because you can't spend, $1,000, $2,000 on one, that your gecko isn't worthy of, anything else.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's living art. You're just basically the, person that's putting that together. So, I mean, I just want to say, like, for anyone that wants to get into them, don't ever like put yourself down or anything like that just because you can't afford what is the best. Just because trends change. I also believe someday that a black and white garg is going to be worth just as much as colored gargs, because you can't find a black and white. It's so hard to find a pure black and white garg with no color on it.
Right.
So I just want to say the gargoyles right now, they're really like getting super expensive. And that's mainly, that's another topic too. That's mainly because of people in other countries importing them to outside of the United States. So for people that don't have the ridiculous amount of money to spend, I just want to say, don't get discouraged. Have that vision on those projects that you want to work on, and then just go after it. It doesn't matter how much money you're going to start with or anything. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, so just work with what you can and what you like.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, as popularity of them goes up, demand will go up. And one thing that you don't see a lot at shows, well, okay, this is my experience with shows in Arizona. 90% of the tables, ball pythons. And then like 5% will be like retics, leopard geckos, gargoyles, crested geckos, 5 to 10% mixed in there, right? I don't know if that's your experience as well, but as desire for gargoyles goes up more, I would like to see like, okay, now there's 20% of people vending gargoyles and they're still selling out at the show, because just for a normal one, that's like $100 or $200. So anyone who has normal gargoyle geckos right now, I still think those are even monetarily very valuable, because as someone who was trying to buy up all the females he could right now to get into breeding. I didn't care what they look like. I just want to get some females, and then I could put like a banger male to them and like create some cool stuff. But even normal females right now, breeder size, are going for like 300 to 400 bucks that don't even have like the best genetics. So if you do have some normal gargoyles right now, hold on to them, grow them up, keep them, because I think monetarily their value is only going to go up as the demand for gargoyles in general goes up and supply can't be met. Like, because there's not as many people breeding gargoyles right now as there are breeding leopards and crested, you know? But so some of these wrap up questions you might need a minute or two to explain. So I'll go into the wrap up question segment, and then we'll do some hot seat questions where you'll just answer the first, thing off of your mind one way or the other. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So wrap up questions. If you could have any reptile in the world, what would it be? No limits. Don't care about whatever import, export, legal, non-legal, CITES. If you could have any reptile in the world, what would it be? Or would it be a gargoyle? Okay, besides gargoyle. Let's do besides gargoyle. That way you have to.
That's a really tough one. I think, like I said, snakes are like when they were always like my original passion. And I've had one of these before. However, I think it had like some type of neurological issues because it started having like that wobble and stuff when it was going around. But I would love to have an adult, or just grow one out to an adult, Brazilian rainbow boa.
Interesting. They have a wobble issue? I didn't know that.
I don't know. It was something that happened over time. I had a baby of one, and it had passed away. However, I think like natural, like without having any type of genetics or anything involved, they're probably, like in my opinion, one of the prettiest snakes, like a natural wild pattern, color wise, and I think they are
they
like
really
the
are.
perfect adult size that isn't like ridiculously huge, but they aren't as small as like a corn snake. They still have a good size. So
Okay, so back to your snake roots, Brazilian rainbow boa. Pretty cool.
yeah.
Let's see. Do you do shows and stuff? Like, do you go to shows and vend shows yet in your area?
No. I mean, I go to them every once in a while. However, I've never vended a show. But it is something that I do want to do, and not necessarily for like to sell the animals, but like one of my, not just like with the gargoyles, but just the reptiles in general, is like one of my goals is to just have like a positive, lasting impact on the hobby, right?
Okay.
There's people with certain names that have lasted, beyond like their active breeding or anything like that. Like there's people, their names with the especially for the New Caledonian animals, like I'm gonna mispronounce it, but Philippe. Here, I'll grab it real quick.
Yeah, that name sounded familiar. I don't remember his last name, but
Like those, like Alan Rapace, you heard of that.
yeah, yep.
Like these people were the ones that went to the islands, and were like one of the first people that went to the islands, collected wild caught species and brought them back. So like that's I'm sorry, what was your question again? I can't believe.
No, you're good. What I forget what my question was. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, anyways, what I
Yeah.
was going off on, for the shows.
Oh yeah.
So,
Do you do shows? Yeah.
yeah, so my goal is to have like a positive, lasting impact like that on the hobby. So
Okay.
I personally would like to do shows, but more for just being able to meet people and to be able to spread that impact because I could do something like this every single day of the week. I could go in and talk to someone for 2 hours, right? People DM me all the time. I will spend as much time as needed to help them out with whatever question. I've gotten on phone calls with people, to help them out. I do whatever I can to help someone out. So I would like to do shows, but mainly for that reason.
So
Right there.
your goal is like education and leaving an impact educationally and like ethically for the hobby moving forward, right? It seems like.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely get that from you. That's really cool passion of yours. So let's see here. Kind of a couple questions, two questions tying into each other. Do you have plans on adding new breeders and new blood? And then what's your take on inbreeding and like how far you go down the line, etc.?
So I do have plans for that. Just because, I feel like if you want to continue to further your collection, then it's kind of inevitable. Like you have to keep adding on at some point. But if you like for right now, I do have a decent amount of diversity in my collection. So realistically, like my short-term goals are to maximize what I currently have. And, I've over the last, 6 months, I've taken kind of like a back step from just constantly like trying to go out and buying what I can. So yeah, my goals like short term wise is to continue with my projects that I have right now. And who knows where that's going to lead, if that's going to lead into other species as well. But I would say for right now, I'm not looking to really do much, but it's always a possibility in the future when you need those new bloodlines into your collection. So I would say at some point, yes, but it's not like an immediate like concern that I have right now. And in terms of inbreeding, this is another controversial topic that people can get into, and everyone has their opinion. And I wouldn't say there's necessarily a fine line on what's right and wrong. But I do believe that if you're going to do something like that, it's very important that you do it ethically and you also disclose any information like that to your customer as well that's purchasing that animal, so they know what they're getting into. Everyone has their opinion about like New Caledonian animals and inbreeding. And as you know, most of the time with genetics, like that's the only way to prove something out is to be able to breed it back to the parents at some point. So I don't think it's a terrible thing, but I would want to ask, what is your intention behind it? Is your intention behind inbreeding is just because it's easier just to do that instead of buying a new one? And there's nothing like really special about this one? Or is your intention behind it because, you have something, a specific trait or something that you believe could further the hobby? I think my opinion, if you bred an albino gargoyle gecko,
Ooh.
I mean, it's kind of like your responsibility to be able to breed that back to the parents to create like, more of those. Right. So I do think there's certain situations where inbreeding is okay. And, especially with reptiles, I think it's a little bit misinformation where people think of it like, humans. It's definitely not the same thing. And me personally, I've never done it, so I can't really talk from experience myself, only experience from others. And even people that have been in, the gargoyles for 15 years, well, I've asked that same question to them, and, they'll give me the answer. They have amazing animals. However, they always say like, there's no need to do it unless there's something there, So inbreeding isn't a bad thing, but you should definitely think about like, is it 100% necessary? Just because, like you said, there is no new imports, for these animals. So what's going to benefit it long term is probably to be as diverse as possible. However, with most reptiles, they're probably, they're probably going to be pretty resilient genetically if you do inbreed them for multiple generations. But it's a personal like moral, ethical question that you should ask yourself. What is your intention behind it? And are you willing to be fully transparent about that with someone that is going to purchase one of those animals?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because sometimes inbreeding too many generations in a row, you could pop out a baby that looks fine, but it might develop slowly or develop small, and you sell it as a gecko that's going to develop perfectly 100%, but it doesn't. Um, so I see this a lot in leopard geckos. We inbreed a lot in leopard geckos. So with some of my babies that are inbred, they'll be the same size as another gecko that comes from the same lineage, but for whatever reason, this one inherited some extra genetic disorders that are keeping it smaller or making its head shaped a little funny, or it has an overbite, right? And it just and some of those things are hard to know until the gecko develops to what we would consider maturity, and you could be like, oh yeah, this gecko did not develop to full size or whatever. And if you sold it to someone as a gecko that would develop full size, then now you've sold them, kind of irresponsibly, like you're saying. So cool. Talking about goals, what would your long term goals be? Would you ever like to do reptiles full time, whether it's being a breeder or being a shop owner?
100%. 100%. I wouldn't say that was my goal 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but once I started seeing like this traction with it, and like personal stuff in your own life goes on, and you really contemplate like what what are you doing, the things that you do, and I think that's not necessarily just like a reptile question. That's more of like a personal type of question, like what type of work are you doing? Do you enjoy it? Do you hate it? Do you want something more for yourself? Or well, that's that debate that you should have with yourself. But me personally, I 100% would love to be able to do it full time. And ideally, I would just, I feel like at this point, you can have, you don't have to have like a physical store or anything like
Online,
that,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pretty much. But I would love to be able to have some type of, facility where I would have just the building, the building's purpose is just, for the reptiles. So it is definitely one of my goals for that. But I also like have that other issue with myself that I I don't want to just buy something just to look at it for profit,
Yeah.
because then personally I'm not going to be fulfilled, by that.
Right.
And that's probably more likely going to contribute to me getting burnt out or something like that. So I'm in, I'm not, I'm in no rush. I'm not going to, like, I don't want it to take forever, but also like I'm in no rush to just go out and buy wholesale a ton of reptiles and then bring them in and then just grow them out, flip them, do all that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
it is one of my goals for sure.
I'm gonna add. Hold on. I'm gonna add this question to the hot seat. I just thought of a hot seat question. Um, so the point of hot seat questions is just like a yes or no answer. Some of them are fun and just personal related. Some of them are related to controversial topics in the hobby. But while we were talking about that right now, what's your stance on wholesale? Are you okay with it? You not okay with it? Just in general.
I mean, what's your intention with it? If you're wholesaling an animal, again, it comes down to transparency. Be transparent with people. Don't tell them that you bred this animal, which is, I've seen it happen before, because people don't want other people to know that, like, they're literally just, if you're running a business, it's okay, but again, I think it also is like an intention thing. Like, just like you go out, people are into sneakers and stuff. I can go out and, get some shoes, flip them, make a little bit of money. With animals, I feel like it's a little bit different just because like people see them more as than an animate object. People have like love and that type of stuff for these animals. So I do think in that aspect, they should be treated with a little bit more respect than, just an object that you're just looking at as, all right, let me wholesale a bunch of animals. I don't really care what health or anything like that, and just flip them out because I'm just looking at the numbers. I don't think wholesaling is a bad thing, right? People feed themselves off of it. And, probably most of the animals that you see at
Pet stores,
like pet stores, reptile shows, that type of stuff are not most likely, but chances, like, there's definitely some that people have just purchased a bunch of wholesale and go do the reptile shows and just sell them all. So transparent, be transparent with these people that you did not produce this and that you might not know the genetics of it, which is an important thing when it comes to reptiles. So that does give you a little bit disadvantage if you're wholesaling. However, I don't think it's a bad thing. If that's what you want to do for your business, then do it. All that power to you. But again, we rely so much on word, and if people abuse that, that's when I think, things aren't good.
Okay. So last question before we get into the hot seat questions. Who are some of your favorite gargoyle breeders in the hobby right now, besides yourself? Because you got you got good stuff. I'm going to be probably buying from you in the future, which is why I kept flashing your Instagram because, okay, real quick, small breeders make it easier to get into the hobby. And what I mean by that is, as an aspiring breeder, like I'm an aspiring breeder, if I was to go to one of the big breeders right now, I might pay 3, 4, 5 times the price for a gecko that might not be as good as a gecko you could sell me, but because you or somebody else who's considered a smaller scale breeder, small to mid, they're willing to negotiate more on price or give you a better deal because they haven't been doing it as long. They're not as established in the business. So I'm all about buying from the smaller breeders because it kind of, okay, let me put it this way. You, Jake, took a lot of your time to find the best breeders, buy their expensive stock, and now you basically have what they have in a way. I know they have a much larger collection, but if I was looking to not do all the research of who has the best stuff and try to pay super high dollar, I could go to these smaller breeders who already have done the research and already have brought in the best of the best stuff into their collection. And now I could find some good deals and I have a funneled focus of top quality stuff. You know what I mean? So I don't know if you have anything to comment on that, but who are your favorite breeders in the hobby that you've purchased from and stuff like that?
I guess if I gotta put a top 3.
Yeah, let's do top 3. Fine? Yeah.
No, in no specific order. Gargoyle Queen Reptiles.
Okay.
Who produced this? Just because I think how she runs, she has a ton of animals, but how she runs them, she puts more time in each of them than people with much smaller collections. Is very detailed, and you can tell she puts a lot of effort into them. So Gargoyle Queen Reptiles is definitely one of my favorites, and she has prices all over the place, so you can find less expensive ones to more expensive ones. And I would say another one is, his name is John Felicetti. If I pronounce his last name correctly, he never said it to me before. But his Instagram is Johnny_Rhac. And the reason I say this is because he, since day one, personal wise, not only does he have a collection of some really high quality animals, but he will take the time to help out anyone. He's a very positive person, and you could tell he truly cares about it. He was the person that turned me onto honestly how you should be treating people. Before I ever spent a single dollar with him, he spent over an hour on the phone with me, just giving me advice, helping me out, doing all that. Not for a sale of an animal, but just because you could tell he cares about wanting to help people out. And then I mean, shoot, this is kind of a tough one, like for the third one, because there's still so many. Um, I would say,
I could ask you to choose between two that I know.
okay, what would you say?
What is your preference of Rack House or AC Reptiles?
So I don't know much about AC Reptiles. But however, that was actually like the one I was thinking about for the third one was Rack House. Just because even though it's a huge scale, like you can tell he has a lot of animals. But I think in terms of what he is doing for the gargoyle geckos is really important. He focuses so much. Um, he puts so much focus on his groups breeding for specific traits, down to that the color of the ring around their eyes.
Okay.
So he has groups that breed for white, black, orange, red and orange, yellow, phantom eyes, horns, size, red base, orange base, blotch, reticulated, stripe. Like he has groups that he refines for all of these traits. So I think in terms of like moving the gargoyle geckos forward, he's definitely one that is, doing a lot to not just breed. All right, let me just get whatever has the most color. Like really focus in on different traits, even though they may not be the most valuable out there.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. See, you've done your research. Anyone who just like looks up Rack House, anyone could look him up on IG, right? Look him up now, Rack House. But you wouldn't know that level of detail that you explained right now. So by me buying from you, Jake, I not only get the benefit of getting some great animals, but I get some great animals that you have extremely researched these lineages before you spent money on it. So I think the small to mid breeders are a great place to go for finding excellent quality stuff, of course, as well as the big breeders. But everyone has their place in the hobby. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
so really cool. So you want to do some hot seat questions? So
yeah,
it's going to be more or less just a single answer. So I don't need like a whole explanation unless we like happen to get into a topic about it. But it's more or less just going to be like choose one or the other. Okay, so one has to go for all time. You can only have one or the other. Is it going to be blotched gargoyles or striped?
The one to go would be stripe.
Oh,
I would keep blotch.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Respect. One has to go. Facebook or Instagram?
Facebook.
Okay, cool.
That's easy for me.
Yeah. Okay. Side note, which one do you have haters yet? Do you have haters at all or trolls, people that kind of
other than the people that the specific person that had called out for some unethical stuff that he was doing to people. Now I try to be as positive and I don't put my opinion out there on someone. Yeah, unless they ask for it,
Okay, I was gonna ask which platform do you get more hate on, Facebook or Instagram? But I think it's pretty universal that Facebook groups have a lot of drama and like snobbiness going on inside of there. Instagram's more just like, hey, that's a cool pic, go, whatever. But there's drama on both. So cool. You said you choose Instagram to keep, right?
Yeah, I'll keep Instagram.
All right, Instagram or Facebook to keep? I mean, Instagram or YouTube? One has to go.
I would keep Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram is more of like a daily update kind of thing. Okay. Sports or arts? Which one are you more into? Sports or arts?
I guess like that's tough because would you consider music art?
Yes.
Like in the arts?
Yeah.
Then I would have to go with arts.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question is music or painting? I don't know why painting, but you do love gargoyles and they are like a, paint job. So painting or music? Which one do you like more?
Music.
Okay.
Yeah.
What Rock or rap?
That's a tough one because if you look on my phone, you'll pretty much find everything from
Rock to
country, rap, rock,
Okay.
like literally anything under the sun. I guarantee you, you hit shuffle, it will be on
It will
there.
be on there. Okay.
But I would have to say probably rap.
Okay. West Coast or East Coast?
I live on the East Coast, but I think I've never been over there. But from pictures and stuff, West Coast looks much nicer.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, we're getting people in the chat answering what they would pick too. So it's kind of funny. There's this model of hot seat questions. I can't take credit from it. I don't know if you ever seen him, but he has a show called Trap Talk, and he does like this kind of stuff. I'm not too in tune with like the artists of the day. In the future, I would like to be able to make people choose between like one artist or another. So one of the things that he does is he says choose between Eminem or Machine Gun Kelly. Now I don't even know who Machine Gun Kelly is. Like I don't even know if I've heard of any of his stuff. But do you have a choice of Eminem or Machine Gun Kelly?
Definitely Eminem. I mean, it's kind of
Okay.
cliche to say, but I've
Yeah,
been
he
a
was
fan of
sick,
Eminem for a
huh?
long time.
I know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm 33, you're 24, you said, right? So you're
yeah,
significantly younger, but you did grow up in that era where Eminem was still like super hot, you know? I mean, his lyrics and everything is just crazy. But okay,
definitely.
so I have a joke for you.
All
Conservative or
right.
liberal? You don't have to answer that unless you want to,
Uh,
but
nah,
yeah,
because
well,
I don't even
you
I
don't
don't
even
even
focus on
put
politics
into
too
that.
much.
Yeah, like that's not for me. Neither of
Gotcha.
that stuff.
Yeah, that was just a joke.
Yeah,
But oh, so okay, so this is kind of tying into the reptile hobby. Are you more for um, reptile governmental reptile regulation? You know, concerning. I'm sure you're familiar with all the bans that are going on, right? Florida has Tegus ban, snakes ban, North Carolina ban, everywhere bans, right? There's a lot of people that are afraid that the whole reptile hobby as a whole is going to get banned in every state, little by little. But are you more in favor of governmental regulation or hobby self regulation?
definitely hobby self-regulation. Just because the speed that what if you're involved in any type of social media for whatever you're into, it's a very you realize it's how close knit. Even though it's thousands of people,
Yeah.
you
You
word
know
travels
everybody, right?
fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that and eventually that weeds out the bad people. So
Sure.
hobby regulation.
Hobby regulation. Cool beans. Fiction or nonfiction? So fake stories or reality?
I would say nonfiction.
Nonfiction. So you're more into reality. Okay. I had oh no, I didn't have a I like to like depending on which one you choose, I like to have like a follow up, but I guess I didn't have a follow up to that. I was gonna ask oh no, I do have a follow up. So nonfiction, books or movies? What's your more favorite?
I I guess for
Wow,
that
you do both, I
it
guess,
would
huh?
be yeah, it would be a movie.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was never a really strong reader, so like movies is always for me. My mind just always zones out. But I definitely respect, appreciate, and admire all the people. My wife is one of them that can just sit there and read a book and like truly enjoy it. But for me, I can't stay focused. I don't know what it is. My mind wanders, and I have to keep rereading that page, and it gets
Mhm.
frustrating, you know. But respect to people who love to read. So nonfiction, and you said movies, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a favorite movie? Like a favorite movie of all time?
Um, I mean that's a tough one because usually that does change like
Okay.
over time. Um, I don't know. Like I would say right now probably like the most recent one that like has impacted me the most is probably it's a movie called Into the Wild. I don't know if you ever watched it before.
Yeah, yeah. It's on. Oh, it's a movie, not a show.
Yeah,
Or
no, it's a real story, but I won't get into it. But it's about someone that it's a kid that went to college, graduated with a law degree and everything, but didn't like that type of life. So he just he ran away from home and he travels across the country. And his goal was to go to Alaska and live off the land. So I
okay,
see myself in like an
yeah,
alternate universe, like wanting to go and do that.
yeah. With all your gargoyles, just bring it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, I think that's it for the hot seat questions for now. I'm going to try to get more like fun and relatable questions as time goes on, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to have you back for a round two again.
Yeah, for
Again,
sure.
everybody who's still here with us, Red Rack on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Jake over here has a great YouTube channel. YouTube is a great platform for information and education. So you can learn from a lot of his in detail videos. That's where I got found, that's where I kind of found you out about. And now I follow you on Instagram because he has some great geckos. So let's get the likes up for Jake. If you haven't yet, please give a like to this video. It helps to promote it, to get his name out there, as well as go subscribe to his YouTube channel because his YouTube channel is excellent. And follow him on Instagram because he loves Instagram and would choose it over YouTube and probably does daily updates there anyway, right? Or somewhat daily, like whether it's
Yeah, someone
weekly or
daily.
something. So I always like to give a chance. Is there anything you would like to say to anyone watching, your followers, your fans, anything like that?
Yeah, so I mean, realistically, I would say we probably only scratched the surface for this type of stuff. So if anyone on here ever has questions or wants information or wants someone to take the time to help them out, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. Like I said, that's part of my goals. So I commit to that. Anyone that's ever messaged me has always got, whatever question or whatever that they're looking for answered. So the main place to reach me is, like you were saying, is on Instagram at Red Rack. And message me there on Facebook, leave a comment on YouTube. I reply to any questions that you have. So I just want to let you guys know sometimes it can be intimidating into, getting into something new. And even though the gargoyles are somewhat popular, the reason I created that YouTube was because there's still some information that's missing that forces you to go out and ask someone. And especially like if you aren't on the social medias, it's tough to know like who to even reach out to. And whenever you do reach out to the people that are most prominent everywhere, like the larger companies that do this, chances are you aren't going to get much of a reply from that. So I just want to put that out there. If anyone on here ever wants to chat about the gargoyles or has questions or anything like that, just reach out to me and I promise you I will reply and help you out.
Well, that's awesome, Jake. I like to keep an eye on the numbers and stuff. And, this is my first live back in a while. So trying to generate that flow again going. But we seem to have had anywhere between like 10 to 15 people concurrently tied into this live. And from the numbers that I'm showing, about 128 total viewers or playbacks for the episode. And that's just on the initial live here. So that's pretty good exposure, Jake. I hope that everyone who watches and has watched this video will go support Jake because he's doing great things, a great heart and passion for the Rhactidactylus part of the hobby here, and especially the red Rhactidactylus, which is so beautiful in my opinion and a lot of people's opinions as well. So please, again, like this live stream and head over to his channel to check out some of his content. So thank you so much, Jake. We'll try to have you back in the future. I'll be trying to keep in touch with you and hopefully eventually buying a gecko from you, but I'll be watching your Instagram for your productions between that super orange gecko and that red one. I'm like totally intrigued about that. So thank you very much, my friend. Thanks for spending 2.5 hours of your night with us, and we'll catch you on the next one, okay?
Sounds good. Thanks again, Frank. I'll definitely be supporting along the way.
Thank you, Jake. All right, Jake. Well, we'll see you next time. And to everybody else, thank you for attending. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream and have a geeky gecko great day. See you guys. Thanks, Jake.